collections form. You can use all of these different elements to build out your forms using labels, different kind of input elements, and different states and different ways to create your layout. Let's take a quick overview. First, we have a regular field with a label and an input with a placeholder text. Then we have a text area input and the checkbox and radio checkbox. These two uses JavaScript to function properly. The same goes with the drop-down and the multiple select. However, you can also use a native HTML select if you prefer so. You can create a loading state. You can create a message that goes underneath the input. This can be turned into a success state, error state, and warning state. You can create an error field, a disabled field, a read-only field, an inline field, and a required field. Then you can set the sizes of the labels on input from mini to massive. You can also create an inverted form if you have a black background. Then the labels will become white. There are different ways to lay out your form elements. You can have equal width form. You can use width in grid columns. You can create a group of fields. You can have an evenly divided group of fields. You can have a stacked group of fields. You can have group with equal width fields. And finally, you can have inline fields. Let's go ahead and see how we create all of this. So in our code editor, we'll now first create a regular input with a label. We start with wrapping this in a div tag with the class UI form. Inside of this, we create our field, which is a div tag with the class field. Inside of this, we add a label element with the text label. We'll now create our input element with the type attribute with the value text and the placeholder attribute with the value placeholder. Let's take a quick look in the browser. I'll refresh and here we see it takes up all the available width as a default. Now let's see how we can create a text area. We'll exchange the input element with a text area element like so. Let's go back and refresh. Now we see it. To create a checkbox with Semantic UI, we need a little custom code. First of all, let's create an inline field by adding the class inline. And let's put the input before the label, change the type to checkbox, remove the placeholder, add the tab index attribute with the value 0 so it can't be tabbed, and add the class hidden. This will hide the input since this is a custom implementation. We also need to wrap the input and the label in a div tag with the class UI and checkbox, like so. Now let's see what it looks like in the browser. When we click it, nothing happens. This is because we need to initialize this with JavaScript, so we scroll down to the very bottom. We add this script tag, and then we'll use jQuery to target all elements with the checkbox class, like so, and run the checkbox method on it. When we go back to the browser and refresh, we can now see that we can check and uncheck the label. Great. Let's continue with the radio checkbox. We'll copy this code and paste it in here. We'll add the class radio to this wrapper here. But before that, we'll create a label element the for attribute with the value radio and the text label. Close the label again. Then we'll change the type to radio. We'll add a name attribute with the value radio, which we were referring to up here. We'll keep the tab index and the class hidden. Then the label for this radio will be option 1. Now we'll copy this whole inline field, or actually we need to wrap this in a div tag with the class field, like so. And now we can copy this. Also, we must add an S here since it's a group of inline fields. Alright, so we have 2 fields here. We'll change this to option 2. And now we can save this and take a look in the browser. We can see that we can choose between them because we already initialized the JavaScript on all the elements with the checkbox class, including this radio checkbox. Great. Let's continue to create our dropdown. We'll start from scratch here. Create a div tag with the classes UI and form. Inside of this, we'll add a div tag with the class field. And then inside of this, first create our label, like so. Then we'll add a div tag with the classes UI selection drop down. You can learn more about drop-downs and checkboxes in other lectures, so don't worry if you don't understand everything that's going on right here. Now we'll add an input tag with the type attribute with the value hidden, the name attribute with the value drop down. We'll add an icon with the classes drop down and icon. Close the I tag again. Then we'll add the div tag with the classes default text, which will be label. And now we can add our menu, a div tag with the class menu, and our menu items, a div tag with the class item, option 1 and option 2. Let's see what happens now in the browser. We can see it looks correct, but it doesn't open. This is because we also need to initialize this. So to do this, we simply use jQuery to find all elements with the drop down class and run the drop down method on it. Let's go back and refresh. Now we can open and select one of the options. Great. Let's continue to the multiple select. Scroll up again. This time we'll start from scratch one more time since this has another structure. So we start with creating our UI form wrapper, and then we add our field wrapper, like so, and then our label, like so. Then we use the select tag with the multiple attribute and give it the classes UI drop down. Inside of this we will add our option. The first option will have an empty value and the text select option, and the other options will have the value 1 and option 1 and 2 and 3 respectively, like so. Let's save this, go back into the browser and refresh. Now we can see that we can use this JavaScript widget. This has already been initialized when we were targeting all the elements with the drop-down class. We can also use the native version if we prefer to do this. We simply need to remove the multiple attribute and the classes UI and drop down, like so. Now when we save and go back and refresh, we have a regular HTML select field. Great. Now let's continue to look at states. I'll just scroll up and copy this simple input here, paste it in. So here we have a field with a label and an input. And now after our field, but still inside of our form, we'll add a button with the classes UI and button, and the type attribute with the value submit, and the text submit. Now we want to add a loading state to this, so we simply add the loading class up here to the parent element. Let's go back and refresh, and now we can see we have a loading state on top of the form elements, which has a low opacity. We can also create a message. So I'll paste in this code as I used before again, and after our field but still inside the form, we add a div tag with the class UI message. Inside of this, we add a header using a div tag with the class header, and we'll give it the text message header. Close the div tag again. We'll now paste in a paragraph here, save it, go back and refresh. Now we have a simple message header with the default color. We can use this to create different states as well. So I'll copy this. Now to create the success state, we add the class success to the parent element and also to the message itself, like so. Let's also put a button down here. Now let's copy this code and change the success classes to error. And before we continue, let's just remove one C here. Now it's spelled correctly. We have the warning state as well, with the two warning classes here. So we have the success state, error state, and warning state. Let's go back and take a quick look. Here we have the success state, the error state, and the warning state. Now let's look at different kinds of fields. So I'll just go back up and grab our regular field here and get back down. Alright, to create an error field, you simply need to add the class error to the field. To create a disabled field, we need to add the class disabled to the field. To create a read-only field, you need to add the read-only attribute down here on the input element. To create an inline field, we add the class inline to the field. To create a required field, we add the class required to the field. Now let's save this and go back and refresh. Here we see the error field, the disabled field, the read-only field, and the inline field and required field. This automatically gets this red star right here to show that the field is required. Now let's look at different sizes. I'll just paste in this regular tiny form here. So to set the size, you simply need to add the class, for example, mini or tiny, small, and after small we have the default, then we have the large size, big size, huge size, and finally the massive size. Let's go back and refresh. Here we can see all the available sizes in action. Now let's take a look at an inverted form. So imagine that we have an inverted segment. We create that using a div tag with the classes UI inverted segment. This gives us the black background. Inside of this we have our form. Then we simply need to add the class inverted here to the form class. Then let's go back and refresh, and now we can see that the label have the white color because it's inverted.